Well, welcome to episode 4 of the Afterword, our series of conversations on books, reading, and the church. My name is Josiah Pettit. I'm the director here at the Westminster Bookstore. And here at WTSBooks.com, we do what we do because we believe that books and reading play a profound role in the life and health of the church. As a team, we continue to be just so encouraged by your response to the Afterword. It's been fun, and we've loved sharing a little bit of the process behind what makes a good book great, as well as introducing you to the authors that are behind these books that have been a blessing to so many. In the coming months, we'll be featuring episodes with Nancy Guthrie, Ed Welch, Darby Strickland, and Mark Dever. So we hope you'll stay tuned and spread the word. Tonight, we're glad to have Johnny Gibson back from vacation to host Melissa Kruger. Melissa is the Director of Women's Content at the Gospel Coalition, as well as the author of Envy of Eve and Growing Together. Her latest book was published just last week by the Good Book Company. It's called Wherever You Go, I Want You to Know. And we've got it on sale right now for a special launch window, so you can pick up bulk quantities at up to 60% off. So if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to hop on over to our website, WTSBooks.com/afterword, and pick up a copy. In this episode, Melissa and Johnny will be chatting about blog writing versus book writing. They'll be talking about mentoring and discipleship. And of course, they'll also be talking about Melissa's new kids book. So with that, by way of introduction, let me turn it over to Johnny and Melissa with a question. What was the first thing you wrote that was published in some sort of public format?
The first publishable thing that I wrote, Josiah, was way back in the early noughties. I wrote a book review for a website my brother and I were that we'd put up called Beginning with Moses. And I wrote a book review for that, and it was put up on the website. But I wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it and then wrote it again. And it was just before I was going to head off to theological college. And I remember thinking, I don't know why I'm heading to theological college when I can't even write a book review. So, and at times I feel like nothing's improved since then. But yeah, what about you, Melissa? What was the first thing that went public that you ever wrote?
You know, I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this. The first publishable thing I wrote was my book, The Envy of Eve. I had never written an article. I didn't consider myself a writer at all. And yet I had started writing Bible studies for women just in my church, never thinking they should be published. You know, just it kind of happened because we couldn't find Bible studies at the time that we really liked. And then women would miss. So I started writing summaries for them. And then people started saying, you should publish these. And I was thinking, no. And so it's really funny to me. I did everything wrong as a writer. I mean, you should start with articles, and I didn't. So the first thing was The Envy of Eve. Okay.
And so since then, you've published a number of books, and you have a regular blog that you write for. What have you learnt about writing from that first book that you produced to now?
Yeah. I think the main thing I've learned is use less words. That if it can be said in less words, use less of them to communicate the point. And I think the other thing I've really learned is illustrations can do so much to help guide your reader into what you're trying to show them. And that can be done very quickly. It doesn't have to be 2.5 pages. I mean, when I think of Thomas Brooks in Precious Remedies Against Satan's Devices, and he says, Satan, he'll show the bait and he'll hide the hook. Okay, that few word illustration speaks so much in his explanation of how Satan's working to try to lure you in. And you know what? It's still relevant hundreds of years later. He used nature to prove his point. And so I think good writing often takes something that we know to be true and uses it to explain a spiritual point.
I think I remember reading C.S. Lewis in one of his letters to the children. You know, he had that book on letters to children. I think he makes the same point. If you can say it in less words, do, you know. Yeah. Have there been any books on actual writing that you've read and found helpful?
Yeah, I think on this, the first thing I always tell people is just to read good books, period. Even before you read books on writing, I think there is something about hearing a sentence. And the more you put yourself in good books, and it doesn't have to be in the same genre. You know, it can be fiction, it can be historical narrative, it can be, you know, whatever you're reading can really help you learn how sentences should be. Yeah, I mean, it's great to read a book on writing, but for me, I think some of the most helpful thing has just been reading beautifully written books by different authors. But one I really did love was, have you read On Writing Well by William Zinsser? Don't know if I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
I loved his book because what he would tell you to do, he would do in the next sentence. So it was, you know, if he was saying, don't use overly long sentences because they really bore the audience when you go on and on and on and on, and then you change. Yeah. And he would be doing what he's telling you not to do. So I thought it was very creative. But do you have one that you like? I always have to read them.
Yeah, I have two books that have helped me. One's called Styling Sentences. And what the author says is that in the English language, there are about 20 sentence structures that exist, 20 ways to write a sentence with different sort of formats, where you put the verb, where you put the subject, object, prepositional phrase, etc. And so they in the book, they show you the 20 structures. And that helped me because my problem was I wasn't much of a reader growing up. So I lacked this ability that you've just said to sort of have caught a lot of good writing, and it sort of comes more naturally. That's not been the case with me. So I needed something to actually show me how sentences are structured. So that was very helpful. And then I read a really nice humorous book on punctuation called Eats, Shoots and Leaves. By Lynn Truss, a British author. And she just talks about punctuation and the importance of it, and the importance of where you put the comma. And the titles comes from a joke about a panda who goes into a bar and eats, shoots, and leaves. Well, does he shoot the bar owner, or does he eat, shoots, and leaves? It's all to do with where you put the comma, right? And she talks about how punctuation is sort of like good manners, and it's a way to help your readers not trip up on what where you're trying to lead them. That if you punctuate well, they actually have a smooth journey where you take them. Whereas if it's not punctuated well, they keep tripping up and having to go back and read the sentence. So those are two books that I've found helpful.
I want to read those, especially that second one. I feel like I'm terrible at punctuation.
Yeah. Well, she'll make you a bit OCD about it. Like, so I now, when I'm watching an advert on TV, I'll say to Jackie, look, there's a typo, and it's the compound adjective typo. It's missing a hyphen, you know, the 24-hour delivery, and there's no hyphen between the 24 and the R or something like that. And so I spot them all the time, and adverts in the street, and, you know, so she'll make me a little bit OCD about punctuation.
Yeah,
you know?
I need to read this because I was a math major in college. So what I learned, there are lots of math rules too, but a math rule is always based in a fact. You know, you can always go back to real numbers and just remind yourself of the rule. So that's how I could always remind myself. Grammar facts are never based in a necessary rule. It's just like, this is the fact. And so I'm terrible at remembering.
Yes.
Where should that period go? Is it after the parentheses? Where should, those things. I need to read that book. That'd be really helpful.
Well, I think you'd enjoy it because similar to the other one you mentioned on writing well, she illustrates it in her own writing and with very funny and humorous examples, and also some quite interesting historical examples with telegrams that were sent with punctuation missing, and how it led to, a war in a country or something like that, that sort of, if only it had been punctuated right, there would have been a different outcome. So it's quite interesting historical and humorous facts. Yeah. Now, Melissa, you've written books and you also write a blog. So what's the difference for you between writing a blog and a book, and what's your process for each?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to blog writing, I find that you need to really focus on saying one thing and saying it well. One thing I've noticed, I actually edit for the Gospel Coalition, and some people, want to take one article and say 20 different things in it, and they're so excited, and they have all these thoughts, and they want to talk about the goodness of God from 20 different angles. And, you're like, just talk about it from one angle, give one thing, and, maybe have one main point and have 3 points that support it, and try to keep your word count to 800 or 900 words. That's my big, and that means you go through and you tighten. That's what I would kind of say to myself, tighten this up. So I kind of write it all, and normally it's way too many words. And then a day or two later, you start chiseling. And I think that's what can make an article that will be actually read online, because the problem with online reading, you are competing with every ding and notification of someone's phone. So if someone's reading online, they can scroll on to something much more interesting than your article. So you've got to really think, how do I make this sentence make them want to read the next sentence, and actually keep an attention span, because online reading is really difficult to stay focused.
Yeah, that's helpful. When you actually have an idea for a blog post, where do you begin? Do you begin typing some notes on your phone, on your iPad, or are you a pencil and pen or on paper person that has to sort of scribble ideas down and then you go and type them up? What's your process there?
Yeah, I keep random scraps of paper, like, because you always think of the best article ideas, like in the carpool line, picking up your kids or something. So normally for me, it's the scrap of paper somewhere tucked away, and I'll find it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's that article I wanted to write, because the 3 points will come in these random places. So yeah, I have a lot of scraps of paper. I actually keep a little notebook in my purse that I can pull out and write down ideas. But when it actually comes to writing, I am a sit down in front of my computer and plug it out. I rarely write, I rarely write an article by hand. But by the time I get to the actual forming the sentences, it's on the computer. But most of my ideas and outlines are on scrap pieces of paper.
Yeah. And so when you come to write a book, do you write out the sort of analytical skeleton outline first? And then do you go bit by bit, or do you sort of just write as it comes to you?
Yeah, I wish I was kind of the latter. That would terrify me, to just start writing a book and just go for it. I am, again, I think it's my structured mathematical brain, how I like, it's very much, I have to see the beginning and the end. What is my argument? What am I trying to say throughout this book? And so for me, for every book I've written, I've had a full outline. I knew where each chapter was going. I actually keep Word documents for every chapter, so that when I have an idea, but that's for chapter 7, I go and just type it and say, remember to put in that C.S. Lewis quote, in chapter 7. It's not meant for chapter 2, and I'm on chapter 2 now. And so I keep kind of buckets to throw stuff in. But that's how my brain works. I admire people who can just write. I mean, I really do. I don't know what your process is like, but I just need the safety of an outline to know where I'm going. But I really do admire people who just can put it out there and somehow come to a beautiful conclusion. By sitting down to write.
And then when you finally do get your draft done, say of a chapter, do you print it off and pencil and pen to edit it, or do you edit it on the screen? How do you go about actually tightening it, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, when I get down to final edits, I print it and I just go at it with, I read it almost like an editor. So I look at it and say, oh, move this paragraph here, mark that one out. It didn't need to be there anyway. But I have to have space from that. I have to have time away from it, because, when you read it the next day, it makes complete sense. But when you read it a month later, sometimes you're like, what was I trying to say? This is terrible. Or you just think of the better word choice, that you couldn't think of when you were writing it 3 weeks before. So I tend to write it and then go on to the next chapter and then come back to that chapter. I need the pauses to let it breathe.
Yeah. And have you had anyone who has mentored you in your writing? I know you've talked about, just reading good books and picking it up. Some writing is better caught than taught. But has there been anyone who, over this journey, and we're going to get on to the idea of mentoring in a moment, has there been anyone who's sort of taken you under their wing and helped you with your writing?
Yeah, I would say having good editors is so helpful. And I've been really blessed to work with great editors at the Gospel Coalition. And so honestly, I can tell you, Colin Hansen and Matt Smethurst and Megan Hill, I love giving them my words and saying, help me. Especially Megan and I. Megan is an author herself, and she's an editor for us. And I'll just say, oh, you make me sound better. It's like, it's like when you go to the hairdresser and someone else does your hair. It's still your hair, but man, they made it look better. And so having good friends like that, you really learn from them. It's really helpful to have people, and it's a real kindness of them to sit down and look at your work. And I'll say this, I think one of the most important things younger writers can do is accept the editing help. If you want to be a better writer, someone who's willing to take the time to read your chapter and offer feedback, that's a kindness. They are trying to help you. And normally they're seeing something that you might not. And so I would say definitely that's been the way my writing has improved, is by having good friends who are willing to tell me that didn't really make sense.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
Yeah, I was fortunate to study under the Regius Professor of Hebrew at Cambridge. And he published a good bit of work, but as somebody said, he never published a magnum opus because his students were his magnum opus. And he poured himself into our writing. He would just mark all over the page. A lot of professors, supervisors just sort of read it and tell you, yeah, it's fine, fix it up. But he meticulously went through and said that sentence needs better word, or there's punctuation missing here. And it made me a better writer, because each time I wanted to have less marks on the page from him. It was like a school teacher again. I was back in school thinking, am I going to get a gold star this week? But it was that sort of fine tuning process of someone else looking at your work. One of the bookstore folk here wanted me to ask you, what's it like being married to another author? Do you and Mike collaborate on projects? What's that like?
It's actually really fun. I will say, and honestly, I never would have written a thing without him kind of cheering me on and encouraging me to do it. But he's been so great. He has read everything I've written, and normally I'm just saying, make sure I'm not a heretic in some way. Will you please make sure I haven't gone astray in some way? But it's really fun because we both think in outlines, and so whether it's him preparing a sermon and us chewing on, hey, what would be a good point to illustrate that? Because there's a lot of similarities to preparing a talk and preparing a chapter. If you're trying to give a structure and an organization, they're very, very similar. And so we actually have a lot of fun. It's something we didn't know that we both were going to do this. Neither of us were English majors or anything like that, but we both love sitting around at the dinner table, talking about different ideas and chewing on, how could you do that book? What would that be like? I'm really excited about one he has coming out next spring. It's actually, we have a daughter she's at college, and she's at a large secular school. And it's basically, his advice on the Christian mind to college students. And it's been so fun. That was one I could actually talk to him about, because most of his are like on the canon or Christianity in the 2nd century. So I'm like no help for him, but this one was really, really fun to get to just chew on together.
Yeah. Is there a title for it that we can look out for?
There is a title, and I should know the title, but I am not a very good wife. And so that is why I cannot remember the title right now.
Sorry for putting you on the spot there, but it's on the Christian Mind at College.
Yes, I think
So
it's something like Surviving Religion 101.
Okay.
How to be in college without losing your faith. It's something in that.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Or that's all right. You can just say that's the working title.
That's the working title. That's my title for it. But it's all letters to our daughter. And it's really because what we both faced, we both went to the same school, actually, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and we both took New Testament from Bart Ehrman. And so you walk in as a 19-year-old, and here you are, and he's telling you all these things about the New Testament you've never heard. Mm-hmm. And, you're sitting there realizing he's studied, he's very smart. He knows a lot more than I do. Mm-hmm. What do you do as a student when you're there? Anyway, that's, so it's something we both faced going to university.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that sort of moves us into this topic of mentoring, because in a sense, what Mike's trying to do there is mentor your daughter and also a next generation of how to think well and engage with these perspectives that challenge the Bible. And that brings me to your book, Growing Together, this lovely book with the subtitle, Taking Mentoring Beyond Small Talk and Prayer Requests. Why did you write a book about mentoring?
There were a lot of reasons. One, I was mentored so well in my early Christian faith, and I'm so thankful for it that I think I felt this need to tell others how important this is to do. But the other thing, I worked for 10 years in women's ministry at my church, and I kept hearing from younger women this desire to have an older woman who could spiritually mentor them. And then I would ask older women who I knew loved the Lord and knew their Bibles, and they would look at me and say, what does she want me to do with her? And they were completely intimidated to enter into this mentor relationship. It just felt like an intimidating thing. And so basically, I was just trying to provide a pathway for these relationships to happen. By no means a prescription. I would never want this to be like, well, this is the book to mentor. I think there are so many good ways we can help one another grow in the faith. But I just wanted to provide one lifeline. Like, here's one path. If you're struggling to know what to do, here's what you could do together. Because I just saw so many women who both wanted to do this, but not knowing how to do it.
Yeah. Now, I learned a new word in this book, and that is mentee. I've never heard that word before. A mentor and a mentee. I've heard a counselor and counselee, interviewer, interviewee, but I thought, of course it's mentee.
It's a very odd word.
It's meant to be mentee. So how would you define mentoring? Is it synonymous with discipleship, or is there a difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say if you looked at discipleship as an umbrella, it's a form of discipleship, but discipleship's a much broader umbrella. I mean, I think discipleship happens when you hear the word preached on a Sunday, in some sense, this passing on of the truths of the gospel. But mentoring, so I would say, and I do want to stress, it's spiritual mentoring. It's not just mentoring on, how to fix a car or how, I mean, that can happen, but we're talking about spiritual mentoring. And, the easy definition I like to say is equipping the saints for the work of ministry for the glory of God. So equipping the saints, for the work of ministry for the glory of God. So it's not just someone to sit down and talk about your feelings. So you may talk about your feelings, but there's a real purpose that I'm, in a sense, investing in you to build up Christ's church for the glory of God. I'm not investing in you so I'll have a new friend. I'm not, although hopefully that's a byproduct. Yeah. I'm investing in you because I believe I'm supposed to call back and pass on to the next generation the truths of the gospel, and that's how the church is built. And essentially, I think that's what Jesus did. He lived, I mean, yes, he went and preached to the 5,000, but for 3 years, he mainly lived with 12 men, and he invested in them, and they shared meals together, and they did life together. And somehow from those 11, this movement called Christianity was born. I mean, that's really, really what he did. And the gospel went forward from his investment. And so I believe that's how the church is strengthened and encouraged as we invest life on life with one another.
Yeah. And you have a lovely illustration at the beginning about your dad and a tree that was bent over in your garden, maybe by the storm, maybe by a young girl swinging in it. But tell us the story about that. And it's reflected on the cover of the book, I think, really beautifully. But I think it really captures what mentoring is. So do you want to share that illustration with us?
Yeah, I remember coming out and seeing my dad tying these two trees together. And I was thinking, why on earth is he doing that? Like I say, because we were playing on the bent over one. It was the one we would bounce on, which was not helping that tree at all. And it had been bent over from a storm. And he essentially tethered it to an old oak that was standing beside it. And I asked him why he was doing it. And he said, this is what's going to help this younger tree grow straight. So it's going to help it in its development. And when I think about mentoring, why I use that image is because in a sense, that older tree is simply standing beside the younger tree. They aren't making them grow. They're not the sun and the rain. They're just standing beside and offering the strength they've been given essentially through surviving many storms. And so when I think about mentoring, I think of older people standing beside younger people and saying, I can't make you grow. Only God can do that. But I can stand beside you and offer the strength that the Lord has given to me as I've walked with him through many seasons of life. And I think that takes pressure off both people. It helps the mentee have right expectations. This person can't solve my life. This person can't make me grow, but this person can stand beside me. And it takes a lot of the pressure off the mentor because they understand I'm just here to offer up what I've been given, but I can't save this person, and I can't make them grow spiritually. And so there's a lot of freedom, I think, in that picture of mentoring.
Yeah. And, as you read the Bible, you sort of see these relationships actually all the way through, don't you? You see a Moses and a Joshua. You see a Paul and a Timothy, or a Paul and a Titus. And you see the fruitfulness of a life in a Joshua or a Timothy or a Titus. Or even a Ruth with a Naomi, the fruitfulness of a life with an older person there who's been just further along the path on the pilgrimage. It's able to look back and give you advice and help along the way. I think it's a really important idea that's firmly rooted in Scripture. Has there been any relationships that you've experienced as a mentee with a mentor that was really helpful, formative in your Christian life?
Absolutely. When I was in high school, a teacher at my local high school was a believer, and she really just mentored us by being a Christian in the workplace. And she ran this ministry called the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And really, she was just available to us. And I mean, she never, what I would say, formally mentored me. She just shared life with us and would pass on so much good wisdom. I mean, I could still hear the things she used to say to us, like, look, don't think you need to be up front if you're not really spending time with Jesus. I mean, she would just put it to us. She didn't want our service without a deep love for the Lord. And those things stuck with me. And then when I went to college, I actually had an InterVarsity staff worker who mentored me for 3 years every week. She met with me for 3 years, and we studied First Peter together. I can still remember studying it with her. But then sometimes we just chatted about life and ministry. But she invested in me for 3 years in a row. And it was just such a blessing to have someone take the time to sit down with me every week and really invest. So I'm very thankful for those women.
Yeah. You mentioned in your book other women who have helped. You mentioned Elizabeth Elliot, Kay Arthur. Did you know Elizabeth Elliot personally?
No, I did write her,
Okay.
and I did write her, and she wrote me back.
Yeah.
which I was just writing her to thank her for her books, and
Okay. Yeah.
just that how much they had impacted me. And she
Uh-huh.
took the time to write me back, which completely surprised me. I did not expect that.
Yeah.
And it was so kind. I have that letter somewhere,
Yeah.
in something. But
Yeah.
just her words. I know you said that her works had really
Yeah.
impacted you as well.
Yeah. I was just fascinated by the Jim Elliot and the 5 missionaries who were slaughtered by the Auca Indians. And so that I was brought up as a missionary kid in Africa, and I've always had a heart for mission. And so that's just always interested me. So yeah, I read a lot of the Jim Elliot journals, and then read her books about that, and then started reading her other books. So The Mark of a Man that she wrote, I read, and I remember it had a big impact on me in my early 20s. And a bit like yourself, I wrote to her once, and I got a reply. Yeah, I preached a sermon on Job 23 on the sovereignty of God and the suffering of his people. It was in my early 20s, and I used her as an illustration. I sort of wanted to encourage her. So I bizarrely found a friend of a friend who in Scotland was like a niece to her from her second marriage or something like this. So I got the address and wrote her, and yeah, she wrote back, typed letter, typewriter, and I have it somewhere in my house. I don't know where, but yeah. So I think she was a great example to younger women of an older godly woman who took her Christian life so seriously, and submission to God even in the midst of some very great suffering. And it's a great example to us. Yeah. Have you had any relationships the other way around, where you've mentored and you've seen a young girl really grow in her faith because of being taken under your wing, or maybe some other women who've taken other girls under their wing? Have you seen some nice examples of growth there?
Yeah, one thing that I loved watching at the church where I did women's ministry for all those years, we actually formed mentoring groups. And so rather than it be one-on-one, we actually did 1 to 2 to 4, because in some ways that made the relationship stay more on track sometimes, rather than get off into one person's kind of circumstantial issues. It really kept the groups pretty focused. And so I watched so many sweet relationships bloom out of those, that so much so that they were just set up to be a year, and some groups said, no, we want to keep meeting. And so they would continue to meet even after the year, and they would continue to get together and just talk with one another and walk through life with one another. And for me, it's been great to be here in the seminary community. My husband's at Reformed Theological Seminary, and to get to just see women who are getting ready to go into ministry, a lot of times with their husbands, or maybe they're in school themselves and they're going in, and just, it's been such a privilege to get to know these women and then watch the Lord scatter them all over the world. I'm sure the same is at Westminster. You see these students who come in for this little time, and now we have good friends in Prague and Spain and all these places around the world doing gospel work, and we get to hear back from them. And it's a wonderful thing to get to be a small part of that larger story in their lives.
That's great. It's one of the great things, isn't it, of ministry, where you see people grow in their Christian faith, either if you've been in pastoral ministry or now at seminary, and hear stories years later of what they've got up to and how they're serving the Lord and the kingdom. It's a great encouragement.
And a little scary sometimes because of the things they remember that you said. I don't know if you ever have this experience. You're like, oh, that's what you remember that I said? Like, I don't remember saying that. But, the little nuggets that will get passed on.
Yeah, when I hear that, sometimes I'm thinking, and I've changed my view on that. But do I tell you that now? Or do I just keep quiet? I'll just keep quiet. I was going to ask so maybe there are some women listening who are thinking, well, I'd love to mentor a younger woman, but I don't really know where to start. And what would even be the structure that I would use for that mentoring relationship? What would your advice be there? Do you have a sort of a general structure that you recommend or encourage women to use?
Well, the first thing I would always say that older women or younger women who are looking for is to go where they are. meaning it's really easy to pick groups and Bible studies with people who are all the same age, as we are, both for the older women and the younger women. And so I would just encourage you, if you're an older woman, go to some events where the younger women are. If you're a younger woman, join a small group that has some older women in it, because it's nice to just get to know people relationally before you ask, will you be my mentor? That's kind of a big question. And then the second thing I say is then just ask them to coffee. Just say, can we get coffee, rather than, again, will you be my mentor, can be very intimidating. But if you are kind of at that place where you're establishing a more formal mentoring relationship, I would say it's really helpful to just put kind of boundaries on it. Like, when are we going to meet? How long are we going to meet? What time, we're going to meet the first Tuesday of every month, or are we going to meet every other week? Those type of questions, because you're both coming into it with different expectations and different availability. And so I just find having that conversation on the front end can help with, things go more smoothly, because you both had it on your calendar. Because I know I get so busy that you just forget, oh, it's already been a month and we haven't met. But if I have it on my calendar that it's the fourth Friday of every month, well, then we're going to get together and remember to do that. So I do think having some structure. And then I think, so that's kind of the structure of the time, but then having something you're actually going to talk about is really helpful too. So if the person wants to grow in their prayer life, maybe you read a book on prayer. If the person wants to grow in evangelism, maybe you read J.I. Packer, Evangelism and Sovereignty of God together. Like that you have some curriculum you're trying to grow. It could just be read the book of John together. It doesn't have to be a book someone wrote, but just to have some content that you're going to study, so that the time isn't just spent on circumstantial happenstance and let's get caught up with one another. Because I think that's what can happen sometimes, is that we just stay in the circumstantial and we never really move into the spiritual growth part of mentoring.
Yeah. And just being even more practical, so when you say open the Bible together, do you have a set format, a set way you approach just beginning a Bible study, the way you prepare for that?
If it's one-on-one, that's so much easier, because you can just read it together and say, do you notice any words that are repeated in this passage? Do you notice any things like a therefore? Do you notice any contrasting words? Do you notice any lists? Those are just some simple questions as you're studying. And then be curious together. What don't you understand? That was confusing. What on earth did that mean? This morning I was reading Romans 7 and I'm confused by it. I wish I had someone to mentor me through it. As I'm reading it, I'm like, what is Paul talking about here? And just kind of sharing that together, and just to have someone to talk through the questions you're both facing as you enter the text and talk about it. So when it's one-on-one, I don't really have structure, just more questions. And I think that's really a great way. What do you learn about God from this passage? What do you learn about man from this passage? All those type questions I think are really helpful.
Yeah. I think about 10:30 tonight, as you're heading to bed, you should ask Mike what he thinks of Romans 7.
Oh, I know. I tell him all the time, you have to help me. I helped put you through school. You owe me, is what I tell him. I have a lot of questions for him. So.
Yeah. So we've talked about mentoring, and how do you and Mike look on mentoring in the family with your children, Emma, John, and Kate? What do you view it as, a unique kind of mentoring or same kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's lifelong. What a beautiful thing, really, to get to grow up in a Christian home, and what a huge responsibility as Christian parents. And in this sense, our kids know if we're fakes. And so I think mentoring our children really begins, I think back to Deuteronomy 6, we have to ourselves love the Lord with all our heart, soul, and strength. And his word has to be on our heart before we teach it to them. And the reality is, it's the most intensive mentoring we'll ever have, because they see the pattern of our lives like no one else will ever see. And so in a lot of ways, we're putting a shape before them of what a Christian looks like, not just by our words, but by our actions. So, I mean, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
The reality of it is terrifying.
Yeah.
And so I hope more than anything, what they've seen from us is that we listen to the Lord, we love the Lord, and by His grace, we try to obey Him. I think that life on life mentoring, and of course we teach them the Word, and we do all the other, but I think the mentoring is really as life on life as you can get. And so it's a privilege, but it is such a responsibility, because they learn the Christian life from watching us, and it's a joy, but. And as I've lived it, what I will say is the Bible is meant for families, because we're told, what do you do with your sin? Because guess what? Every one of you are going to yell at each other at some point. And thankfully, the Bible tells us the healthy way to deal with that. Say you're sorry, repent and ask for forgiveness. And it's really when you see these precepts really do, in some sense, work in practice. That's a healthy way to respond to our sin, and we're teaching them all those things. But doesn't mean it's easy to do.
Yeah. Well, you've written a lovely book for your children, which is sort of part of the mentoring process of instilling a great truth in them. This is the book, Wherever You Go, I Want You to Know. Where'd you get the idea to write this book from?
My daughter was heading off to college. She was a junior in high school. And actually, the kind of strange part of the story is I broke my ankle. And I was home from church one Sunday. And so the house was quiet, which is rare, for anyone. And actually, I was journaling, and I had just finished praying for her. Just not knowing, there's a lot of pressure on high school students, where they'll go to school, the grades they're making, how they're going to score on these tests. And you start thinking as a parent, what did I teach them? It all went so fast. Did I teach them how to clean the toilet? Did I teach them to cook anything? Do they know anything about life? And kind of what settled in my soul is, have I told her the one thing that matters? Have I told her the one thing? It doesn't matter what she does. It doesn't matter where she goes. Does she just know all I really care about is that she loves Jesus? She can do whatever she wants to do. She can, be poor. She can, whatever, like all those things don't matter. Does she love Jesus? And so it kind of welled up from thinking about my child going off to college.
Okay. Well, it's got a lovely title, Wherever You Go, I Want You to Know. I noticed the alliteration, wherever and want, and the end rhyme, go, know, and then the 5 syllables, balancing it out. So it's a perfect little refrain which you repeat throughout the book, and that's what makes it so memorable. Did it take you long to come up with that? Did that take a lot of tightening, or was that something that actually came quite inspirational and came quickly to you?
Yeah, I went back and found my journal thinking about this. And it's funny. It was the very first thing I had written was that kind of refrain that went through. I was looking back, and I don't know anything about writing poetry. So it was just the thing that came to me was this little rhyme. And I have no idea. I wasn't, it just sounded right, if that makes sense, but I didn't really plan it.
Wow. Well, it's perfectly balanced, 5 syllables on each section of the sentence. It would probably be one of those 20 styled sentences that I spoke about in the book, earlier. No, it's lovely. It's a lovely little book, and it's poetic all the way through. So did that actually take you long to, make everything rhyme all the way through?
Yeah, there's the little different parts I had written. It was really fun, again, to go back. Like, I'm sitting here with this little journal right here, and I had just marked out different bits and written different bits, and it just kind of came together. And I have no idea. I mean, I wasn't thinking of a children's book when I was writing this. It was just, I've found myself doing that through the years. We actually lost a child to miscarriage, and I wrote a poem for that child. Someone had told me, find a way to mark that child in your heart. You don't have a grave, you don't have, but it's this, how do you kind of honor that child? And so I woke up at like 2 a.m. when I knew I was losing the baby, and I wrote this poem. It was called Child of the Womb. And it just came out. And that's kind of what happened in this instance. It just kind of was the groaning of the heart, and the putting forth of what we think. And so, it just kind of happened.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
Well, I actually think a lot of writing is actually inspired, not in the theopneustos sense of God breathes, but I really do think good writing is often just something that's inspired in the best sense of the word, where you just get that urge to write something down, that feeling, I got to get this down. I need to write about this particular thing. And even though it maybe goes through many, many drafts before it's fine tuned, it's still, the original inspiration is what actually makes it so good, I think. What do your kids, Emma, John, and Kate, think of it?
They've had so much fun with it, because we did start editing it. Actually, Katie Morgan at the Good Book Company helped, just saying, hey, can you add in some things like about life circumstances, failing or succeeding? She was so helpful through the process. And so I remember one car ride, I was getting the kids to help me. I was like, how does this sound? And, we just had so much fun as a family kind of working on it together, and they were laughing at different parts. And so it's been really fun to get to do with them in a lot of ways.
That's great. There are beautiful illustrations by Isabel Lundy. Did you have much input to that? Tell listeners what the process is like between the author and the illustrator, and the relationship there before that you actually get the product.
Yeah, so they sent me a few different illustrations from a few different illustrators, and when I saw hers, I just loved it. I loved how it was whimsical and fun, and I actually was writing to her the other day, and I said, "But I love." The first picture I saw was this picture of the king. And you could cook meals for a king. That was the line. And the little girl's holding all this food, but then her foot's kicked out and there's a teacup sitting on the foot. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. It just was so cute and whimsical. And so I love that about it. I know you did a kid's book as well. Did you work with just one illustrator and do that process?
Yeah, a bit like you, they sent me, I think, a couple of examples, and then I said I want this guy Joe Hawks, who had illustrated for New Grove Press, because the kids book I did was a true story about us losing our daughter Layla, and a conversation with Ben and me. So I wanted me and Ben to look like us, and want Jackie to look like she did. And he was really good. He was so sensitive to the whole sort of progression of the pregnancy. But he really built up the excitement that Ben was expecting. He had a T-shirt on, I'm going to be a big brother. He just added touches that we never asked him to, but we thought, wow, you have been so sensitive to all the expectations we had, that we were about to have a little girl join the family, and then she didn't. In the live sense of the word, but of the term of family. But he was excellent. I mean, there was one time one page where he had me wearing sort of slightly pink pajamas, so I had to ask him to change those, because I thought my mates are never going to let me live this down if they see me in pink pajamas. So but he was great, and there were some things I said, oh, could you fix this or change that, and he was very flexible. We actually have a funeral scene at the back of the book, because we had a funeral for Layla, a white coffin at the front. But I sent him a photo of my family and friends who were at the graveside, and I said, would you mind just putting people in that look like this? And so basically at the back of the book, it's our whole extended family drawn in to the church scene. And so that's really nice for all of us who were there to sort of remember that day, which was bittersweet, as we said our final farewell. So yeah, I think it's good for listeners to hear that. I think an illustrator of a kid's book really makes it, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I mean, your poem is really well done, But if you didn't have good illustrations, the book would sort of flop.
Absolutely.
The words would fly, but the pictures would just not capture. Whereas it's got both. It's got great words and great illustrations.
Yeah, it was so surprising because some of the things she couldn't have known, like there's a picture of a boy with it looks like a zucchini or something, but my son loves to grow watermelons, and he will come in with these huge watermelons, and it was so funny because she couldn't have known that, and then you see it in the picture, you're like, that's perfect, know. And so it's really fun. I found it a more fun process than any other book because pictures are a lot better than editing words.
Yeah, very true. Do you have any other kids' books planned as a result of producing your first one?
I have an idea for one that I've discussed with a friend, and so we're kind of thinking through it. Would it work? And so I love children's books. My mom was so great. I had books around my house all growing up. Wonderful books that stick to me. It's interesting. There's this book called The Little Rabbit Who Wanted Red Wings, and it's really a book about envy. And I find it interesting that was my first book. The moral formation that happens through children's book is pretty profound. And it wasn't a book in the Bible but it was just a story that kind of told right and wrong. Yeah. And I think there's a real place for that, in the Christian world, just telling the stories that make us love what is good and hate what is evil without necessarily being a Bible story, Yeah.
That's great. And do you have any other books in the pipeline, for women or adults that you...
I feel done. I just want to, I have ideas, but I'm putting them on maybe in 5 years. I
thought COVID, you would have been, writing away on 3 books at one time or something.
No, I'm ready for a break. My writing fingers feel numb. So I'm ready to take a little break.
Yeah. Well, what would you say to folk listening who may have an idea for starting a blog or writing a book, but they just think, well, I'd love to do it. I think I've got something I want to write on, but they've never done it. What would your advice be?
Yeah, I would encourage them to start trying to write an article or send a pitch to a publisher. I do think it's really helpful. Even then, it's less intimidating than starting your whole blog, to think, am I going to have something to keep saying? I mean, that takes a lot of time. Whereas if you maybe have one article, send it off to a publication and try to get published. And it's great to have the editing help because, I think one of the worst things that can happen is hitting post too soon. And so having someone who can help you in that process and even edit you before you start really writing on a regular basis is really helpful, because the honest truth is people who work in editing are trying to protect you. We don't want it to blow up in a negative way for you. So sometimes they've seen the blow ups happen, so they know what to look for. And so it's kind of helpful to, I know it's great to just start blogging and write in that way, but I do think it's really helpful to write in places where you can also be edited and do that. But also just talking to people who write and saying, hey, would you mind looking over this? Yeah, Jen Wilkin has a great article on having a friend editorial team. Friend editorial, she put it all in one word. She has the theologian. She likes to have reader work, but she also has just the average layperson reader work. And that's really helpful to know. Is this something you should spend your time on? Does it resonate with people? And getting back advice is really helpful. Yeah.
Does I was going to ask, does Mike edit your work? But I think you did answer that earlier. He does read over everything. Do you ever edit his stuff just from a outside person?
Yes. Yes. His blogs and things we'll talk about. Yes. On those I can read and help him with normally. But a lot of times for both of us, it's so helpful to have another person who can just look at it and say, oh, I think you should move this here and do this here. So we both read each other's a good bit. Which is helpful.
I think the thing, you mentioned it earlier at the beginning, but you've just sort of touched on it there about moving things around. I think people read good writing and they think, like, wow, this must just flow out of their fingers or pen. And I remember J.I. Packer, when I read Packer, like Knowing God, I think he's sitting beside me talking. It's so effortless. It just flows. But I remember him saying that all his writing has been like something like, I've forgotten the number, but 6 to 8 drafts of going over it and over it and over it. And I think that sort of can help young writers realize it's like building a wall with bricks. You sort of start building, and then you realize, that brick doesn't fit there, it needs to go over here, and this bit needs to go there. And it really is like a building process, isn't it? Where you sort of build, sort of break down again, build again, build, and only then at the end does it actually sort of look half decent.
Yes.
But it really is a process. It's not something that just comes naturally. I was thinking about it today. I was trying to write a preface for a book I'm editing, and it's taken me 3 days to write a 2-page preface. And I thought, this is really a result of the fall. Like, why can I not just sit and write 2 pages and that they flow logically? Why am I always moving sentences around? But it is just part of the fallen world, isn't it? Trying to write with fallen minds.
Yeah. I remember I was talking to James Anderson, is a professor down here, and he said, just get something out. And think of it like a big block of marble, and then you start to chisel it. And you're going to cut, just similar to that block imagery. And that's what I think now. I say to myself, I've got 1 hour, just get something on the page. You can chisel it later. And so I'll write the bad sentences, but I'll just get something out. And that keeps me writing. Is that it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yes. Finally, Melissa, you're involved in mentoring women's ministry in your local church, but you're also involved with the Gospel Coalition. You're the coordinator for women's ministries and initiatives at the Gospel Coalition. We know your conference was postponed, unfortunately, due to COVID. Do you want to give us a wee update on that and what the plans are for that as we close?
Yes, hopefully we will be gathering in April. We have, but as we all are learning to say, if the Lord wills, it's funny, we're studying James, the book of James, which is, our theme is steadfastness. And it's been very needed this year. And so we've laughed. We're like, well, we are having to be steadfast about planning this conference and trusting the Lord, if he wills. Hopefully we will have it in April. So we love being together with that conference as women. It's, we had over 10,000 women registered to be there. It's such a wonderful thing to get to gather together and study and learn, and then have an amazing bookstore and all these things, and we love it. So I hope it will happen, but we're trusting the Lord as we go forward.
Well, we will pray it is the Lord's will that it happens, and you can all gather together and be fed from the book of James. That would be wonderful. Melissa, it's been wonderful having you on the Afterword, and thanks for joining us, and we wish you every blessing with your books that are already out there, and your family and Mike, and pray that you keep writing and serving the church in this way. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been so fun to get to talk.
You're welcome. I'm going to hand back to Josiah now, who's going to tell us who's coming up in the next episode.
Well, thanks, Johnny and Melissa, for joining us tonight. I'm happy to announce that on episode 5 of the Afterword, we'll be hosting CCEF's Ed Welch and Darby Strickland. Ed and Darby will be on for a conversation about Darby's new book, which releases next month from P&R Publishing. Her book is called Is It Abuse? And it's available for 50% off on our website. So I'd encourage you to hop over to our website, wtsbooks.com/afterword. You can pre-order the book and find out more about episode 5. A reminder, you can download the Afterword in podcast format. It's available on all major platforms. You can also rewatch episodes on our YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us. That's it for now, and we hope to see you next time on the Afterword.